Welcome to Hood War Stories. In this episode, I'll be discussing Canoga Park, Alabama. Canoga Park, Alabama, also known as CPA, is a Mexican-American gang located in Canoga Park, California. The town of Owensmouth was founded in the southwest corner of the valley on March 30th, 1912. It was an agricultural community producing wheat, sugar, and beets. In 1931, the town's name was changed to Canoga Park. It continued to be a small community until Pierce College was founded in the 1940s, and the large aerospace firms arrived in the 1950s. In the 1960s, the 101 freeway connected the West Valley to the city, making Canoga Park a suburb of Los Angeles. The city of Canoga Park is bordered by more affluent areas on three sides: Woodland Hills on the south, West Hills to the west, and Chatsworth on the north. For many, thoughts of Canoga Park include a city downtown area, aging subdivisions, and a crime-ridden barrio. The Canoga Park, Alabama gang dates back to the 1930s. It started off as a social club for Latino farm workers in the western San Fernando Valley. It began as a group that would serve as a protection agent while they were targets of discrimination. Over the years, it evolved into a car club. Later in the 1970s, life within the club took a dark cast as drugs and guns began to infiltrate the barrios. No longer an innocent social group, Canoga Park, Alabama mushroomed into a full-fledged street gang. It's named after the neighborhood on which it preyed and the street that spans its turf. The CPA gang is active in 4.6 square miles of the valley floor, roughly bounded by Roscoe Boulevard south of Van Noen, between Topanga Canyon Boulevard to Winnetka. They are one of the most isolated barrios in LA County, with only one neighboring rival within a 2-mile radius. Block after block of aging, high-density apartments line the residential streets in this overlooked part of the West Valley. Just a mile away from the upscale Westfield Topanga Mall, they live side by side with hardworking low-income families, crammed into small frame apartments and houses. Lanark Park is considered a CPA stronghold. It was considered their headquarters for gang activity and drug trade operations. The CPA gang hovers in size from about 400 to 500 members, with about 50 to 100 hardcore members as a nucleus. CPA's primary activities include the distribution of narcotics, stealing cars, assaults, and carrying out armed robberies and burglaries. The CPA gang has been in a long-standing feud with Southside Reseda Trece. Southside Reseda Trece's barrio stretches from Victory to the 101 freeway, between Wilbur and White Oak Avenue. This beef has led to sporadic shootouts and a handful of casualties. On August 11th, 2004, Jose, Carlos, and Margarita were hanging out at Reseda Park, which lies within Southside Reseda Trece's territory. A Honda Civic, driven by CPA member Johnny, drove past the park twice. While some of the car's 4 passengers mad dogged the group, rival gang signs were flashed. And as Johnny drove off, Carlos, joined by Jose, got in Carlos's Volvo and pursued them. After catching up with the CPA group, Carlos pulled along the right side of the Honda and swerved toward it several times. The person in the Honda's right rear passenger seat pointed a gun out the window and fired several shots toward the Volvo. One bullet struck Carlos in the head, the other struck Jose in the arm. 3 witnesses identified CPA member Joelle as either the shooter or at least someone who was in the Honda. The first was Diane, who was Johnny's girlfriend. The Honda belonged to Diane's mother, which she had taken without permission. She was seated in the front passenger seat of the Honda during the incident, and testified that Johnny told everyone in the car to duck just before Joelle started shooting. Another independent witness named David was in his car about 60 feet away when the shots were fired. He was shown a photo 6-pack lineup. He initially thought Joelle looked like the person in the right rear passenger seat. Over time, his certainty about that fact grew. Joel Castaneda, from CPA, was ultimately convicted of first-degree murder and attempted murder. He was sentenced to 50 years to life. In 2002, an LA City attorney filed a civil gang injunction against CPA. A gang injunction is a restraining order against a group, declaring the gang's public behavior a nuisance, and asking for special rules toward its activity. Even though their main territory was less than 2 square miles, the injunction covered nearly 9 square miles, where they were prohibited to associate. The CPA gang made their claim to fame in 2007, when they landed on LA's 10 worst gangs list. The primary reason they earned a spot on this list was because they made up the majority of hate crimes committed in the San Fernando Valley. The CPA gang hasn't hidden the fact that it targets Black Americans in their community. In the West Valley, it's well known that CPA harbors racial animosity towards black people. In 2006, CPA began a campaign of assaulting black Americans in Canoga Park. Within a 6-month period, starting from July 2006, there were 12 shootings targeting black people in Canoga Park. 9 of those 12 included racial slurs prior to the shooting. CPA graffiti reflected the gang's hostility towards black Americans. Officers and pedestrians have seen graffiti in the neighborhood containing the letters NK, which stands for the N-word and the word killer. Nixon Gill's venture out west to California started off with much promise. The 2006 South Florida graduate enrolled at Pierce College. With the dreams of transferring to a D1 school like USC, he had been getting used to his life far away from his Florida home. Football practices were going well. The 5'11" running back had performed admirably in a preseason scrimmage. On Saturday, August 26, 2006, Nixon took a step outside to place a phone call to his mother back home. He wanted to tell her about that day's scrimmage and how he was ready for Monday for the start of his classes. Instead, he was carried out on a stretcher, his dreams shattered by a shotgun blast that authorities say was aimed at him by a member of the CPA gang in a drive-by shooting. Nixon was seriously wounded, taking shots in the neck, shoulder, and left eye. The eye injury was the most serious. Nixon endured 4 surgeries from late August through October. The first 2 surgeries were in Los Angeles, the last 2 were in Miami, after his mother and brother came out to get him. Nixon knew he was living in a rough neighborhood, but was never really concerned for his safety. He said, "I wasn't a gang member, so I thought I'd be safe." He hasn't played football since he was shot. On June 13th, 2007, at around 10:40 p.m., a black American man drove into the parking lot of the Narc Park. As he was in the car, 2 CPA members walked up, shouted a racial slur, and opened fire at the vehicle, striking him in the chest and shoulder. 2 days after the shooting, 2 15-year-old black youth that were helping their uncle's girlfriend move out of a nearby apartment on Narc Street were allegedly beaten in an unprovoked attack by several CPA members. At least one of the attackers shouted out a racial epithet during the beating that was caught on surveillance camera. Gabriel Chavez and Juan Carlos from CPA were arrested for taking part in the beating and were convicted of felony assault and slapped with a hate crime. On December 22nd, 2008, Samuel and James were working at Canoga Park Bowl, which is a bowling alley. Shortly after 8 p.m., Samuel saw James walk toward the dumpsters outside the bowling alley to take out the trash. From the inside, Samuel heard 3 gunshots and within seconds heard James say, "What the hell?" Samuel went outside and saw James walk a few steps, then fall to the ground. He suffered a fatal gunshot wound to the heart. Samuel then saw a vehicle in that same area make a U-turn and speed away. A medical examiner who performed the autopsy testified that the bullet entered the left chest of James, and the bullet's trajectory was consistent with the shot fired horizontally at James while he was bending. About 5 minutes after the shooting, 2 officers that were on patrol saw a car that possibly matched the description at the intersection of DeSoto and Satacoy. The officers followed it and a pursuit ensued. The officer saw a CPA member in the passenger seat. He recognized him from previous contacts. The pursuit continued down several streets and ended when the car crashed on Sherman Way in front of the Vallarta Market. Martin Sotillo from CPA was ultimately convicted of first-degree murder and slapped with a hate crime charge. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. On May 23, 2010, at around 11:30 p.m., Terrence and his brother Greg were standing in front of an apartment complex located on Canby Avenue in Reseda. They were smoking cigarettes and chatting about sports. They were not gang members, not armed, and were not selling drugs. The apartments were located outside of CPA gang territory and was controlled by one of CPA's rivals. 2 Latino men then walked down Canby side by side towards Terrence and Greg. When Francisco and Anthony were 5 to 7 feet away from Terrence and Greg, Francisco said, "Fuck you, Nick," with a hard R, and pointed a gun at the brothers. Terrence and Greg then heard a clicking sound. Terrence realized Francisco was attempting to fire the gun, but it had jammed. Terrence told Greg to run. Anthony, who also had a gun, ran into the street as if to get a better angle and fired 2 shots at the brothers as they fled up a driveway. One shot hit Greg in the thigh. 5 minutes after the shooting, An officer who was in an unmarked car spotted the suspect driving northbound in a black Toyota. The officer followed the car, which sped up between 60 to 70 miles per hour. The black Toyota then led multiple officers on a high-speed chase, speeding through dips in the road, fast enough to send up sparks. Then ran at least 5 stop signs and 1 red light without slowing, cut through an alley, and then a fool for less, narrowly missing a pedestrian. It then made a U-turn on a red light in the middle of the intersection. When the Toyota re-entered Satakoy, it accelerated to speeds of 90 miles per hour. The car was straddling, swaying from side to side, and zigzagging, displaying clearly evasive maneuvers, trying to get away from pursuing officers. An LAPD helicopter began following the car, and the officer terminated his pursuit because it had become too dangerous. The Toyota continued at speeds up to 100 miles per hour. At the intersection of Satakoy and Mason, the Toyota, which still had its headlights off, ran another red light. 2 other vehicles were approaching the intersection. The Toyota drove in between the 2 vehicles, narrowly missing them as all 3 vehicles crossed the intersection. The Toyota continued down Satakoy completely out of control and slammed into several parked cars. The impact crushed the back half of the Toyota. Ali exited the Toyota talking on his cell phone. Francisco attempted to start the car and reached under the seat before he was pulled away by officers. Anthony, who was in the back seat, was unconscious and badly injured. He was transported to the hospital. Gomez, who was also in the back seat, had suffered major trauma and was dead. Anthony and Francisco, from CPA, were convicted on 2 counts of attempted murder. The getaway driver, Ali, was convicted of second-degree murder and evading officers, causing death. He was sentenced to 65 years to life. The CPA gang has also had friction with a few Pacoima-based gangs, notably the Latin Times. On the night of June 8, 2007, Olga, her sister Veronica, Daniel, and William went to a house party in Granada Hills. All 4 belonged to the Pacoima TDS gang, which is a clique of the Latin Times. The entrance to the party was through a gate located in the alley behind the house. 2 or 3 security personnel checked for weapons and charged males a $5 entrance fee. While waiting in line to enter the party, a male who was with Enrique made a derogatory remark to Olga and her companions about Veronica's tattoos. They called Veronica Pacoima Ho and said Canoga Park, meaning the CPA gang. Dan responded by saying, "The fuck you say?" And Pacoima TDS. Olga, Veronica, and William also said, "Fuck Coco Puffs," which is a derogatory term for members of the CPA gang. As he was going into the party, Daniel shouted, "Fuck Canoga." At the same time, Enrique and his male companion shouted profanities at the security guards, and another member of the CPA gang flashed a weapon. Shortly after being turned away at the gate, Enrique climbed over the fence into the party. He immediately went up to William and asked him where he was from. When William said Pacoima TDS, Enrique pulled out a handgun and opened fire. He then fled the party. While Veronica and other TDS members were attempting to help William, a car drove by and the occupants yelled out Canoga Park while flashing gang signs. An officer responded to the scene where he observed William lying on the ground, semi-conscious, suffering from a gunshot wound to the stomach. When the officer asked William who shot him, William answered Canoga. William died moments later. 4 days after the shooting, Veronica identified Enrique from a 6-pack photo lineup. Enrique Gonzalez from CPA was ultimately convicted of first-degree murder, with findings that he personally discharged a firearm, causing death. I'd like to thank you guys for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe.